What's up, guys? It's Andy Priscilla.
This is Director X.
This is Amberly Lago.
This is Sina Sadaf.
Yo, this is Apathy of the Demigods.
This is Bradley and Michael Francis here.
This is Chris Voss.
Yo, this is Charlie Tuna.
This is Ryan Serhan.
This is James Harris.
Hey, this is Steve Sims.
Hey, what's up? It's Billy G.
And you are listening
to the Run GpG podcast.
Stop playing. Please stop.
David Shing, aka Shingy, is an Australian futurist, speaker, creative director, strategic digital consultant, and entrepreneur. Known for his performative persona and his bold and polarizing moniker, the digital prophet Shingy is a multidimensional creative who specializes in advising clients about inventive and effective approaches to optimizing brand value within the digital landscape. He is passionate about educating big brands about the unique opportunities afforded by emerging digital, social, and mobile technologies. Shing has spent most of his adult life in the digital world, working for both large and small creative companies globally, while also co-authoring several technology-related patents. He recently served as Verizon's media digital prophet, and prior to that, AOL's European head of media and marketing, responsible for 11 countries. As I said before, he is also the hardest person in branding to lock down for an interview. That's a fact. David, welcome to the Run GpG podcast again.
Mate, hello, and what a mouthful. Obviously, that was all too hard in one breath, but I appreciate and respect the cadence, my man. How's everything? All good?
Yeah, we're good. A shout out to me for getting through that bio. It is your bio. It's really extensive.
And the fact that you read that out like that, I realized I should probably refine my bio to just does stuff.
It does stuff. I mean, pretty specific stuff, which I'm excited to talk to you about. Again, had to get you on here because, as I was mentioning to you before, branding, marketing design, something we're pretty passionate about. And I can't wait to chop it up with you about all things digital media, of course. But to begin with and set the stage as we did once before, but I want you to explain it again. I get a little bit of the Shingy background, the Shingy backstory. So the first question is, who is David Shing? Where are you from? Where did you grow up?
It's interesting. First, it feels like this is an interview we haven't done because I can't remember any of the questions. So I'm going to be as equally surprised.
Okay, I'm safe.
This time as I was last time, by the way. But what I do think is interesting is when you first ask a question like that, my first instinct is to say, how deep do you want to go? Because, we're going to definitely talk about this, I'm sure, but there are 3 pillars to every successful brand on planet Earth, and the first one's story. So, if you were to find out my sort of recent story, it's pretty easily found on the interwebs. However, the fact that I'm from Australia and I'm from the country of New South Wales, which is halfway between Sydney and Brisbane and inland 3 hours, I'm from this small little country town and 10 kids. And I had the misfortune and good fortune to have some mishaps happen in my early part of my life where I got hit by a car and spent months in hospital and I was pretty badly damaged. And my parents just decided, hey, man, just let this one be what he wants to be. And instead of running off the rails, I kind of ran towards being more of a polymath. So as a kid, I had a radio show. I used to sell Levi's jeans. I used to toss a wok because I grew up in a Chinese restaurant. I was a bartender by 15 and I did night school for hotel management and I was a avid photographer. So I was very interested in a lot of different things. Oh, and I tried to learn 4 chords to become a member of a band. And at the same time, do the grit and grub that you'd expect for 10 kids. It was really kind of fun. But at some point I decided I need to make a decision on what I wanted to do in my life. And in Australia, you go through school with a definition. You don't come out and just think, oh, I'll go to university and figure it out later. You need to kind of know. And I did. I came out being pretty design focused, but also fashion focused. So I had the opportunity to study fashion or graphics, both around design. And I chose graphics because I felt like there was this comprehension around design, advertising, communications, PR, and what does that mean? And in fashion, that was just going to be a little bit more challenging. So I went off and studied design, mate. That's my background and that's where it came from. And it's the core of my heart and soul today. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky in my early 20s to invent some internet technologies, which enabled me to kind of move to the US later on and try and figure out how that was all going to work.
So that explains a lot, actually. You have a design background, but how specifically did you get into the world of branding and advertising for some of the biggest companies in the world?
Yeah, so as a young designer, I had the good fortune of working for an outline agency. So some of the big advertising agencies would outsource some of their creative ideation to these small agencies, and I worked for one. And so I was very fortunate that at like 18, 19, because I did an accelerated design degree, I was in the industry and I was designing for people like Pizza Hut, Toyota, and, a bunch of big brands at the outset. And not because I worked for a big agency, because I worked for a tiny one. And that tiny agency represented big brands. And so I had a taste for big brands early on in life. And that was really I was really lucky. But in my mid-20s, I also tooled around with brand iconography, like what does it mean to actually build brand icons and designs, et cetera, et cetera. And it was really, that was my first taste, how to actually think about brand architecture, which ultimately ended up being things like design thinking. And David, in my early 20s, I spent some time in Hong Kong. I tried to reclaim my Asian roots. I'm half Chinese. I look like I can speak the language, but I can't. So it wasn't incredibly fruitful for me because they really just want to speak people in their native tongue. And it was, I can barely speak English, as you can tell. But what was most interesting for me was I learned this technique of capturing ideation called mind mapping. I teach it today, actually. I teach people how to mind map, because what it does, it helps you think about a peripheral of ideas by, starting with a core central thought, and you just branch off. And what that allowed me to do is capture ideas quickly and start to understand, a brand communication isn't linear. It's got to be lateral. And so if it's lateral, if I'm thinking like that, how do I make a brand think like that? So anyhow, I got to do some brand iconography when I was quite young, which was great. But the biggest change in my design career was technology, because I'm a classically trained graphic designer, meaning I can talk about hand kerning fonts and spacing and, great things like glyphs and all this sort of stuff today that is a great art of craft. And it allows me to come back to that, to think about craft, even in the digital experience. But when I self-taught myself, computers and design, that's when it completely changed my mind and thought, wow, there is so many leveraged technologies here that can help creators actually create, and left brain, right brain can be experienced differently. So how do we do that? So that's part of what I did in my early 20s anyway. I'm rambling about how I got there, but it was all really about understanding how do you actually connect with somebody emotionally, and how do you technically produce something as well. So I've been very much a practitioner in my career, as well as somebody who talks about the theories of connections.
Mind mapping is interesting. I didn't know that. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. I feel like I'd be really good at mind mapping personally. I think I've tried it. For some reason, I can't get through the actual process of brand. Like, I get the idea behind it. And, I do a lot of public speaking. So I've heard that mind mapping can be really good for that, right? When you're,
well, if it's not hooking, it's a bit like yoga. You have to do it 3 times for most people. First time, it's incredibly uncomfortable. The second time, it just seems awkward. And the third time, it may stick.
Yeah.
It's a lifetime, but it has been a lifetime for me. And the thing that I like about it, most people don't know this, is when you mind map, you mix words, colors, pictures, emphasis. So there's a number of different things that help you in your visual cortex, helps your brain recall those things that you've articulated around an idea, as opposed to just words. So most of the world is actually trained on basic ordering of ideas, top, left, bottom, right. And that's not how the brain necessarily, the most fruitful way for the brain to really articulate ideas. It's more sort of lateral. And that's why mind mapping for me has definitely been very sticky, mate. But anyhow.
Well, maybe I should apply myself more. Hey, Shingy.
Well, I'll show you. Come back and make sure I retrain you on it, because
100%.
Maybe you formed some bad habits along the way.
Maybe I did. So listen, and the other part is, scripting and fonts and design. I mean, I went through a period where I was like really obsessed with script, really obsessed with it. Some of the best script writers in the world I reached out to, just because I wanted to understand, like I said, I'm obsessed with script. There's some, graffiti writers that now, they showcase their work in galleries, and they're all based on script, all based on script. So I feel you. Now you in particular, you've established yourself as a unique personality, right, in this world. Forbes magazine called you, check this out, an artist, a globe-trotting speaker, and a market seeker. Now, the same article also said, David Shing is a storyteller who identifies emerging trends and inspires clients to think differently. And I'm sure those that, work with you would say that that's accurate. But how would you describe what you do?
Yeah, I think that description from Forbes is pretty accurate. I would just say that, e.g., I have a very strong point of view But at the same time, I closely align with empathy, which is very simple. If technology can help move humans forward, then God bless, let's get on with it. Some of the things that I talk about, particularly in forums around technology, so when I spend times at places like CES, is contextualizing technology and the florifera of amazing technology. There's 127 products launched per second in the category of Internet of Things. Two things: the computation of data is going to have to be much faster and much more interesting and accurate than we've ever seen. And secondly, what are we going to do with that? So, if I look at that whole idea of sort of empathy from the lens of a human with technology, where I find it to be fascinating is some of the categories haven't really broken out. They haven't really become something that people are decided to adopt, because I find that, to adopt a new habit, you have to be prepared to break one. And that's maybe why mind mapping hasn't stuck with you. We grew up in the world of the internet, and then along came social, and obviously autonomy is a big topic right now. And then we have collaboration, and we know what that's all about. So that's, the Airbnbs, the Ubers, et cetera, this world. And then there's wellness, and then there's space and health. These are all categories that we're thinking about in these industries. But the revolution, or the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution, is really anchored around intelligence. So it's less about things that distract us, and it's more about how things are learnt about us and become convenient. And therefore that convenience could be a helper. So brands that help people by the way that they collect their data and feed that back in a unique way, that's where I think the opportunity is going to be interesting around that. But that wasn't really to answer a question of yours. It's more of a brain fart around the things that I care about, and that's technology helping humans be better.
Yeah, and that leads me to the next question. I've heard you say you have the privilege of looking at things in terms of trends and distilling that down to human terms for brands and companies. So how do you do that? What's the process? How do you help companies and brands relate to the everyday consumer?
Yeah, well, great questions. One's that sort of, observing humans in the wild. And it's been pretty wild, man. So particularly in the last 18 months with COVID, some of the habits that we think we've formed have actually changed. I read a statistic that said that bedtime reading went up almost 2,000%, which I hope most of that is paper. And also when we think about baking went up 35% or something. And the other thing that was really interesting is just generally people's ability to want to discover things went up. And so what has become apparent is in real life is incredibly important to people, to the point of even potentially risking their health, but at the same time, not in the manifestation of what they're used to in the past. So a lot of people won't go back to these massive crowds. They'll do it in sort of more intimate, safe environments. And how can people translate that? And how can brands take advantage of that? But also, one of those things you asked me, which is how does it work? Well, not just observing people in the wild, but I tend to associate and certainly hang out with people that aren't like me. I'm married to an artist, which is incredible because she really gives me a different cultural point of view. They help validate some assumptions I have with some of the things that they're thinking about in their community, because sometimes they're the outsider and they sit on these outliers of culture, and they create culture that people want to be part of. And then they have to shift with it because sometimes they get outpriced with that culture. But where I find this to be fascinating is the group of people that I have are small, and we connect, and, it's more like a one-on-one dialogue in the old-fashioned sense. And then, it just radiates out. The last thing I do is worry about what the internet's thinking about. I have a small net of people that I get to sort of think about ideas with and see whether that culture is going to translate.
That's incredible. Talking about your creative process, how it relates to, distilling brands down to human terms. Now, this is something you've been talking about for a while. And you talked about it, right? Just the pandemic, unfortunately, and then fortunately, baking has gone up, bedtime reading. Is this something you see a lot more companies paying attention to now, humanizing technology? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And look, and this is why I think it's an absolutely beautiful time and a conscious time if people want to be radical in the way that they're thinking. So for too many years, I've stood on stage and I've bantered about disruption, and then I've bantered about brand experience. But the truth is transformation. So to take that buzzword and contextualize it, you can't transform unless you're prepared to, one, as a person, two, the organization and the structure of which your organization is positioned in, and then ultimately how you actually think about that transformation to how you engage with consumers. There's almost 8 billion people on planet Earth, and 50% of them have never known life without the internet. If you think about the vast majority of people that are walking around the planet with a device, that smart connected device is pretty amazing when there's like 3 billion smartphones on the planet.
So one of the things that I find to be incredible is what are those connection points really about? So today you have a choice. You can either be left or right, or black or white, or red or blue. And it's no longer necessarily blended. You have to have a point of view, because if you just decide to stay in the middle, mate, you're going to be in the middle of what I call the care curve. So you have to believe in something. You have to have a point of view as a brand, of an individual, as a person, as a business. And you need to actually have that ooze out of your brand. Otherwise, people are just going to skim over you. And why is that the case? Because that's what people are believing in today. Regardless of political movements or social movements or religious movements or economic movements, all of these things actually relate to people relating to the world. And part of that world is consuming brands. We all consume brands. We just have to determine how we're consuming them. And a big thing that I think is sort of radical in that change is that I was in the business of making people want stuff. That's ads. That's radically changed now to people, to brands that are smart and making stuff people want. Mm-hmm. And if you're in the other path still of making people want stuff, then you have to be very different about the way, firstly, you need to change. But secondly, you have to be very different about how you actually connect with people. And the biggest thing, and we all have heard about it, is empathy. There's no longer this awareness-based advertising. We really need to make sure that we can have people that can actually align with us. It's not about awareness. It's not about amplification. It's actually about alignment. Can that person come alongside you? Can we change these distinct ways that we connect with people and actually change that mindset as a brand, and then start to think about that with creatively how we connect with them? Because truthfully, the industry hasn't changed enough to hasn't transformed enough or fast enough to radically engage people who've already outpaced their culture. And that is something that's very hard for us to realize. Because look, about 20 years ago, we cut these big holes in the internet and said, this is how we actually connect with people through advertising. We never evolved those connection points. And I'm not here to rag on those ad units, because there was some great experimentation in the early days on those ad units. For example, David, I remember a thing called Band in the Box, where a band literally made ads to the size and scale of MPU, which is a mid-page unit, 300 by 250 pixels, and a leaderboard, which is 728 by 90 pixels. And the band would stuff themselves in this box. So you'd have a drummer and a guitarist playing this little tiny square, and you'd have a synth player laying down playing. And they did a live concert broadcast across the internet through these banner ads. And I thought, awesome. We're on our way to radically revolutionizing this direct mail style infrastructure built across the internet. Well, we haven't. What we did is we just decided, let's make it programmatic. Programmatic said, let the robots do all the thinking for us, but let's just stick them in these spaces and hope to God people realize that they're still there. So we're changing this whole paradigm to have to catch up to the speed of the culture of what people are actually changing. And here's the thing that's really interesting, is that we're no longer dealing with the consumer consuming content. Dead and buried, dude. You're a classic example of who we're trying to actually catch up with. The creator, the critic, and the curator of what? An experience. What we're doing right now is we are having a one-on-one experience for many people. How wonderful is that? That's everybody's today attitudinally that decides that they want to be somebody who creates versus participate versus observe. And they're the three choices. Pick one. And as a brand, they're your three choices. Pick one. Because all three, it's called the internet. And so it has to be far more interesting in my mind to think about how that can transform. I told you, this feels like a new interview, man. I had no idea what we talked about last time. I don't even know what these questions are, but these are the things that I have at top of mind for you today anyway.
It's fantastic. And, I'm so glad we're talking about this. This is something we've been preaching for a while now, is in our industry, everything's changed. The shopping behavior of consumers has changed incredibly over the last few years, especially in real estate, where people are going to shop for, properties, how they're picking a real estate agent. That's all changed in the last few years. So you have to understand that. And, we say that there's three big things that have changed everything in real estate over the last few years. And we talk about how to navigate that. And I think you have to adapt and change. It's critical. It's imperative. You must do it. Otherwise, like you said, you're going to be left behind. But to that point, maybe that leads into the next question here is there one big mistake that you see companies and brands making?
Yeah, they're still talking about amplifying their brand. And they're not talking about the empathy, the coming alongside people and understanding that. And we talk about brands becoming human or brands speaking human. Is that true? Yeah, it's absolutely relatable if the brand actually can do that. So I, however, think the mistake is doing the same thing they've done always. They haven't heard about the last 18 months. They haven't listened to what the seismic change could have been. And attitudinally, they haven't changed. And that mindset of getting back to where we were, are you kidding me? That is absolutely never going to happen. And secondly, who wants it to be like that? If you're going to be hit with 1,500 media messages per day, which ones are you remembering? And which ones are you consuming to ultimately change your pattern enough to absorb something new? So that's where I think it's completely misstepped. And also understanding that it is still about consumers consuming content, and they're not realizing that we've got to deal with the creator, the people who consume your brand in a way that allows them to create better decisions, better cycles, whatever it is that they're part of. That's the opportunity at hand. And look, if you look at real estate, no better example than this. The shift and move of people around psychologically, geographically about their mindset of cities and urban and rural and geographic. What an incredible opportunity to change, because the old days of thinking about how do I actually fill a hopper has changed, because you need to understand that the data you collect on people have to make really interesting decisions that is pointed to the thing that they care about. There's lots of interesting nuances around it, typically never exclusive. 1, 2, people are moving for very different, psychographic or persona reasons. And so to support all of that and collect that data and understanding that, hey, these people are looking to move because they're really thinking about, the life of their child and they want to be that epicenter. Ultimately, the space that they actually occupy, that could be the lowest thing on the list that they're really trying to understand. And your job is to unearth that in ways that feels really different,
I love that. I think that's such a good breakdown of, the industry has been so archaic for so many years, but from a brand standpoint, from a business standpoint, it's, these were most brokerage models, which we're brokerage, the models were built in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. The way that people, seek information is completely different. And like you said, you need to connect with the individual, because they're out there, they're looking, they're connected to so much information. So how to connect with them on an individual basis, which is interesting because you do talk about the connected human and how that relates to, brand attention. So the question is, do we know what consumers are up to?
No, we kind of guess that they do, or we do, but we don't really know. And the reason for that is there are different types of people out there, and they all have different psychographics. There are people who are strivers or makers or believers or achievers, or however you want to sort of dissect each one of them. They have a different need. Mm-hmm. They also have a different use case. So the way that they have connections with brands, particularly digitally throughout the day, changes. And what's fascinating about that, as much as we try and understand how people swipe left, right, up, down, pinch, pull, whatever, and how much people like, love, comment, we're trying to understand by this consistent change of intelligence to see if we can know them better. But part of that instinct of knowing them is just understanding how you're reflecting to them. The second part of that is performance. So you got a great brand story, awesome. Does your brand do what it says it does? That's based on its performance. Ripper. It's all performance style. And I think that's kind of a bit rubbish, because if it says what it does on the tin and does it well, great. Then that's the payoff. But the biggest thing that people just don't focus on is feel. I mean, if I look at your brand, what's the feeling I'm going to get? Are you urban? Are you rural? Are you going to charge me 15% of brokerage, some house that I could have sold directly? What's the feel for you? Do I trust you when I come to it? All of that is all based on the senses of your brand. And you can get that digitally. I mean, there are different ways that you can determine how you want your brand to feel. We know it in the real world. How do you want that in the digital world? So anyway, feel, I think people need to spend more time on it.
We are going deep on this. I like it. And you may have kind of answered this, with that question, like what should brands and companies focus on when telling their story?
Oh yeah. So it is feel in my mind, not the usual sort of performance indexes that they'd run on with performance. Because look, if you've got a great idea that could be inferred, that creative idea could be inferred by the data that you have, and you've just gleaned an insight, and your gut check, not your head check, but your gut check says, this could be a great creative brief, and it feels very aligned with the feel of the brand, and you go and seed it out there and it starts to be contagious, then amplify it. And that's where you decide to pop, tune up the performance matrix. But instead of just coming out and saying, I'm going to do a media plan void of an idea, I wouldn't do that. I think people need to focus on feel. Also, get back to focus on story. Why? Because as we move away from ads and we move into a world where people sort of align with brands differently, because that's what the social platforms allow us to do, you have to be very, very, very careful that, you don't just hijack the internet with bullshit memes. You need to be far more empathetic, as I said, and I've used that word a bit too much today, but I apologize. But what I mean by that is stories are a really good way that you could actually do that. Because, I look at brands, I'm a fan of Chanel, not because it's the most expensive in its category, but really because I love the story around it that makes me feel like if I was to buy a 2.55 Chanel bag from, I know the story behind it is mystique. It's full of this mystique, and it's mysterious, and it's got this incredible little kind of hidden stories that if somebody ever wanted to talk about that bag, I could give them some really interesting knowledge, because the story is so phenomenal, from the cross hatching on the leather that matched the saddle blanket to the color of black, which matched the priest all of these things are just incredible little stories that says that brand is incredibly well thought for. And it doesn't matter whether it was invented in 1955 or it was invented in 2025. It's an incredible story. Has incredible
the Chanel story, if you didn't know it before. Very interesting. Yeah, I love that. Now, it's true that, consumers, they see hundreds of media messages every day, if not thousands actually, right, of media messages every day. Can you touch on the importance of unique selling propositions or key differentiators and the importance of identifying them to drive growth?
Yeah, okay. So that whole statement sounds very KPI, which is fine, and that's great because it needs to be. So I would say that if you think about USP, the biggest USP in that, David, which I think that's really the heart of what you're saying, is what is that uniqueness? So how you take that USP and how you actually deliver that to the target audience of which you want to be compelling to, that's your decision. The second part of that is what are the things that you actually want to connect with? So there's a number of those things that just, to me, contextualize the whole proposition, because then ultimately the job should be very difficult for you when somebody comes in the door and says, you came in and you purchased. What were all those things that made you make those decisions? That person should come back and say, at the end of the day, the pull thread was it felt like I came in through human language and I came out connecting with a human that made that feel like the biggest decision of my life in a financial purchase decision. It felt like it was aligned and I had somebody who could support it with me. And that would be the ultimate referral. Because ultimately what you are trying to do is say, in this business of connecting with people through all these other channels, all these other ways that you can connect, ultimately they're going to want to be able to pass it on and say, this person will give you value better than you ever thought you would. So that's why I would use and find the next place that you settle into.
That's probably one of the greatest breakdowns of what a unique selling proposition should be I've ever heard. So fantastic. From the man himself. Now, I've also heard you talk about the importance of sight, sound, and motion. So, in addition to mobile first, like why should companies and brands be thinking about video first as well?
Yeah. Okay. So those three things, right? So if you look at that as a measurement, you want engagement. Why do you want engagement? Because dwell time will allow people to actually hopefully reinforce your brand better than the next. So video is clearly one of those things that does that. But the other piece, obviously, in this visual communication of which we're part of, that needs to be unique as well. I'm not in the more is more category. I like to be more refined about the way that I think about stuff. I'm not an output where it's like just, there are many people that go against this, which is just put out as much as you possibly want. The crowd will tell you that's fine. But I'm a curator, man, which means I actually have a particular point of view about the way. If you look at my Instagram, for example, it's all black and white. Mm-hmm. I shoot in black and white. So my phone setting goes to black and white. So I challenge myself before I actually start shooting, because that's the old photographer in me. So I use that platform particularly for black and white, and everything else is in color. So where I'm saying all of this just to say that there are multiple ways that I think that you connect with people, and you should be using all of those tools because we are in a multimedia world. And part of that is sight and motion, but sound is equally as important. Incredibly impressed by the way that MasterCard have done that, where they engineered a DNA sound that was a 3-second ding, ding, ding at a transaction level, all the way through to saying our brand actually has this much stronger, much more percolated DNA threads. So therefore, this sonic sound resonance is something that you can recall at the register, or maybe it's embedded in some of these sounds because artists have picked it up and said, I love the resonance of this DNA, therefore I'm going to use it in an orchestral piece. But it all came from MasterCard. That's pretty dope, dude. And that's far reaching. But why is it dope? Because if you look at the sound category, smart speakers, et cetera, connected headphones, oh, it's a multi-billion dollar industry of 2020. So we're not just in this visual-based cortex where everything comes in, it's going to get locked into my vagus. No. We're in this world that sound is equally as important. Second most important, because yeah, we can connect by vision and that's incredible. But brother, you know this, you guys produce incredible playlists, so you hear something sonically you resonate with, you're like, that is phenomenal. And today that sonic has to be even shorter than ever before, because back in the day, I remember I would buy albums and LPs when I was in the radio days, and I'd love to sit back and read the liner notes after listening from track 1 through 12. Articulated, curated by the band themselves, so therefore they're a tastemaker, I'm a fan, I'm going to connect. And I need to listen to song 1 to song 12. Today, if you don't have built in a hook in your song in about 3 seconds, good luck that somebody's going to give you 3 minutes of their time to actually allow them to take that song all the way through. And I know, I form those habits today, man, where I look for the hook really quick and I'm like, do I want to go back and listen to the whole song now? And, that's 3 minutes. Gone are the days when you have an album, had a 5-minute drum intro. Done. So, however, that said, I do think there is a sort of backlash against that, where this elongation for subjects that people are really interested in allows for that to actually we have room for that. But I'm coming back, all of this to say that sonic is equally as important. So brands, yeah, you need to make sure it's visual. You need to have video because, it's part of the context of the world we live in, but so is sound, and it's equally as important to think about your sonic resonance.
I miss those days, going to the store, buying a CD, bringing it home, listening to the whole thing, reading the liner notes. I think we're showing our age, but I do miss it. There was something about it. It was.
But hang on 1 second. So let me backtrack on that. If you look at all these artists today launching albums, what are they launching it on?
Well, they're doing vinyl now.
They are.
Yeah.
And there's more. In 1980s-ish, Sony closed down their last LP plant in Japan, and they reopened it about 2 years ago because of the demand on vinyl. And you look at Tower Records in Japan, have lines around the corner, and people are actually buying vinyl, which means they're actually going back. So you skim across the surface for topics you're interested in, then you go super deep with things that you actually find interesting. And I find this whole thing it's either ironic, or it's just these moments where it just cycles. You see it in fashion, you see it in music, you see it in the fact that everybody thought that everybody in the delivery business sort of had a freak out moment when drone delivery was happening with Amazon. Mm-hmm. Are you kidding me? That wasn't what they were doing. That was a placebo. What they were doing was actually saying, no, we're not doing that. We're going to sneakily over here, we're building grocery stores in every corner. And over here, we're building, coffee shops where we're going to allow people to go in and buy books, but we're going to print them on demand. It wasn't about drone delivery. Drone delivery was just a bloody placebo. It was more about local, making but people feel like it's kind of, they're connected to something. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was genius for those monsters.
Are you a new real estate agent or thinking about getting a real estate license? If so, you're going to want to ask about the Greater Property Group's Agent Scholarship Program. Why pay for the cost of the course yourself when the Greater Property Group will subsidize the cost for you? Make sure you reach out and get all the details on the Greater Property Group's Agent Scholarship Program. Okay, here's the next question. As the world of digital advertising, media, and branding evolves, everyone's talking about where artificial intelligence comes in, where AI fits in, and exactly where are we going with AI. So I want to get your thoughts on that. The progression of AI. What's the future of AI as it relates to digital media?
when we talk about artificial intelligence, it comes in the capacity of two movements, little tiny ways that it helps make changes, e.g. data collection reflected back by just a better experience. That's awesome when it comes to AI. But on the other side, which is part of your question, which is a leading question about brands' involvement with AI and what happens, that part of it today is cold, meaning there's lots of inferred data and insights that can go this way, but you still need the human to make the decisions. And what I mean by that, particularly when it comes to creative and brand and story, etc. The machine can tell you what to do, not how to do it. That's the role of the human, and that's the role of the creative. So it's where I'd love people to make sure they're educated that way through schools and jobs that will exist, because the machine's going to scoop up all those things that if it can be mathed, it will be mathed. And so there's this whole sort of human piece, the emotional piece, that really needs to be articulated by a head tilt. Something that says, I don't think this is right, but my gut is telling me maybe we should try it. That's the head tilt. It also relates back to the sight, sound, emotion piece, by the way, because ultimately what we're doing, our job, your job, my job, is to drive people's emotions. 75% of purchase decisions are made emotionally. We sell to the heart to justify to the head. But a lot of what we see in brand, digital connections, etc., is selling to the head to try and drive it to the heart. I think it's the wrong way around. So AI is a great start to all of that, but it's not the panacea yet. Because if you go and see some commercials or work that's been done just all purely by AI, there's always something slightly off about it. And that's because it's not driven by that human insight. I'd also say exactly the same thing around avatars. There's always something a little off about them. And that's because there's this texture that's missing that can only really come from human issues, human problems, human mistakes. The grandmasters, I think it was, I'm going to misquote this, but I'll say one of the grandmasters said that every single one of their paintings has a tiny flaw in it, just to make sure that the human brushed it. And I thought that's a really kind of nice way to think about, firstly, where is it? Where do I need to go find those? And secondly, it's just that really nice touch to understand we are human. Also, but that said, there are incredible AI experiences, particularly if you think about bots, that if designed well can make somebody feel comforted, because a bot can be far faster than waiting for a human, and secondly can facilitate help. So if your bots can do 90% of all the support that you need to be done before you hand it to the human, that's great. But if the bot says, now I'm going to hand it to a human because I've now limited my experience with you, I think that's a really smart transition. So it can be used on this side, on the data side, in a way to help get people to where they need to get to. Then jump it across to the human is a good way of thinking about it.
That's a fantastic breakdown. You touched on it briefly, the fourth industrial revolution. Can you unpack that? Give us your summary.
Oh, yeah. So the first industrial revolution was steam. And then along came electricity and then computing. And the fourth industrial revolution is going to be intelligence. And why that's important for us to understand is that those intelligence come from pretty much everything that has a tiny little chip in it. And that chip's either powered by Intel or NVIDIA, one or the other, right? And so it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So it doesn't matter whether you've got a little device that is using low-powered Bluetooth to close your blinds and open your garage door and all those sort of things that you think are super smart. That's collecting data on you. Every single device in your house that's a smart device is collecting data on you. So intelligence is clearly where it's all going in. But here's the thing. There is no centralized Uber intelligence machine figuring all that out. But it's our job to interpret how that could be. And the platforms, there's a number of them obviously working on it to figure out whether there could be that ubiquity. But at the moment, there's no clear winner. But intelligence is clearly where it's all going.
Super cool. And in the time we have left, what advice would you give an aspiring ad executive looking to make an impact in the world of advertising and branding?
Wow. That's a good question. What would I tell them? Depending on where they are in their career, and it really doesn't matter where they are in their career, and that is act like the human who is consuming that brand, period, full stop. And how would you like them to communicate to you in a way that feels like you would say, wow, I need to share this with all my friends because this thing is way better than I thought it would be. The number one ingredient that makes things super contagious is surprise. So if you can either make somebody laugh or make somebody cry and they're surprised by the emotion that's driven by that, that's where emotional-based advertising works. And by the way, there is other advertising out there, and that's kind of the DR stuff, the direct response, and that's fine. But those two pieces of creative probably never should meet in a dark alley because they're totally different and they perform different functions and they're used differently and they're created differently. But to an aspiring ad executive today is that you come alongside the person who should be consuming it, act like them, be like them, and stand up for them. And who typically will force bad creative is the client. And not because they are bad, it's because they think they own their brand. And they don't. The person who consumes the brand, and I mean that from consuming the brand, therefore to make great decisions that are action orientated, they're the ones that own the brand. And they're the ones who are going to be contagious enough to say, I need to tell other people about it. David, I think it's that easy.
That's incredible advice. Incredible advice. 2 questions left. We did this before, but I need to ask you again. If you could have dinner with any 3 people in history, past or present, who would they be and why?
Yeah, okay. So it'd be both my parents. My dad spoke broken English and bad Chinese and broken English, I guess. But he left way too soon. So I'd love to have a conversation with my dad. And I lost my mum last year at the beginning of COVID. So it'd be really good to kind of do a catch up with both of them in the same room. If it was the same dinner, it'd be funky, but I'd add somebody like Stevie Wonder in there just because he's one of the best performers I have never seen. And evidently he's never seen me, but I'd love to meet him because I think it would be just legendary. And if I could add a 4th person to that, obviously.
Hey, listen, man, you're the disruptor. So add a 4th.
I'd add 2 more people. I'd love to take my wife for the conversation so my honey could hear it. And my daughter, so she could get the wisdom from all of those people, because I need somebody like her to be the one who's going to radically change where this universe is headed.
Incredible. That's a fantastic answer. And final question, what is your legacy? Like, I know it's a topic that's thrown around a lot, creatives think about this. Like, when all is said and done, what does this, the David Shing legacy look like? What do you want to be known for?
Wow. I would like to be known as somebody who will inspire others to do better than they ever thought they could do.
Mm.
And I have had that fed back to me a few times. Several times when people have come up to me and said, because of what you've done, I completely changed my career. And that's why now I'm having success in this area. And regardless of all the pontificating and all the big brands that I get to bang out with and all that sort of stuff, brother, that's what it comes down to, is that somebody had the belief in me at some point along my career to support me along it and take my ideas and say, these are great to be amplified in an industry that needs it to be heard. So therefore, we need you to be an ambassador for us.
Mm.
And for somebody to have that happen to somebody else, that's what I hope I'm here for. Because, I made a big decision to leave Verizon at the height of what I was doing, ultimately because I want to be a better listener and ultimately a better teacher than just an amplifier. And, that's definitely what my consciousness is telling me. Is that helpful?
Oh, very helpful.
Incredibly,
Fantastic.
that's a sincere answer too.
No, it's a great. No,
I wanted to do something else. I would say I want to be the best guitarist on planet Earth, which clearly, Jesus, that day may have left me with that.
Well, it forces you to think. But anyways, the point is, thank you very much for sharing that with us. Thank you for joining us today. Really compelling conversation. It's so true that brands and companies really do need to think about how they're connecting with humanity. I do believe that as well. So good to get to know you better. It makes sense why they call you the digital prophet. Great stuff. Thank you very much again, Shingy. Really appreciate your time.